To reconvene the open session of our investment committee meeting for today. I don't think we have to call the roll again, do we? Come on.
No, I'm sorry,
Okay.
let the record reflect that Ms. Mott is here. She just stepped away for a minute. And so you
Here
do
she
have a
is, right
quorum.
here.
So you do have a quorum.
So we have a quorum.
Yes.
Mr. Kiley is meeting by phone for today. Next item is agenda item 8, approval of minutes of the April 12, 2013 investment committee meeting open session. Any comments or motion?
Move approval.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next item, actually, we have two consent items, items 9A and 9B. Does anyone like to poll either of the items, or I'll entertain a motion?
Move approval. Consent calendar.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the two consent items. All in favor, please vote aye.
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 Aye. Harry? All right, thank you. Items 9A and 9B are approved. Item 10, well, actually, we're going to go a little bit out of order here. We would normally have public comment at the end of this open session, but we have some guests here who are from out of town who would like to make comments on a specific topic. Therefore, we're going to have, specifically related to this one topic, some public comment at this time, and then we'll continue on with the rest of the agenda. So I'd like to call initially Alyssa Giacchino. Alyssa?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman and committee. My name is Alyssa Giacchino. I'm a researcher who follows private equity and real estate with Unite Here, the Union of Hotel and Casino Employees. I'm here today with workers from the Hyatt Regency Phoenix, a hotel CalSTRS is invested in through Pacific Coast Capital Partners and its California Smart Growth Fund 4. The labor situation here is a threat to CalPERS' financial interest because workers are being provoked into both litigation and a boycott of this hotel. The mostly immigrant workforce at the Phoenix Hyatt has long faced an environment of crushing workloads, low wages, lack of job security, and mistreatment. Workers started organizing to improve their working conditions and asked Hyatt management for a fair process to decide whether to unionize, but instead have been met with anti-union pressure. Workers at the Phoenix Hyatt have filed charges with the National Labor Relations Board alleging intimidation and interference. In a moment, workers will describe for you some of what they have endured at the hotel. CalSTRS is a significant investor in the California Smart Growth Fund, representing about 1/3 of the fund. In addition to the Phoenix Hyatt, the fund owns 2 other hotels in San Jose, both of which are union hotels. CalSTRS' relationship with PCCP extends far beyond this fund. In fact, CalSTRS has committed to nearly every PCCP fund and also leads a venture that has a 25% ownership stake in PCCP. Given the breadth of this relationship, we believe you can effectively urge PCCP to proactively protect CalSTRS from the risks associated with a labor dispute. The Hyatt Regency has become a flashpoint in Phoenix as the community mobilizes around immigration rights. A May 1st immigration rally in Phoenix drew over 1,000 participants who rallied outside the Hyatt Regency as an employer that abuses immigrant workers. I have shared with you a Chicago Tribune article that quotes one of the Hyatt Phoenix workers who is here with us today, Miriam Mariscal, saying, quote, "We have been attacked as immigrants and we have been attacked as workers," unquote. Elected officials in Phoenix have expressed their concern about the working conditions at the hotel. 2 city council members have urged PCCP to address the problems. We have shared copies of their letters with you. Across the country, Hyatt has singled itself as the worst hotel employer with dangerous workloads, subcontracting, and unsafe work conditions. Hyatt has been in a multi-year labor dispute with Unite Here and is currently the subject of a global boycott endorsed by more than 5,000 individuals and organizations. Hyatt has already lost $26 million in hotel business as a result of the boycott. PCCP and Hyatt could ensure that the Phoenix Hyatt Regency is disentangled from this national labor dispute. Just recently, 2 Hyatt hotels in Long Beach, California resolved their long-standing labor disputes in a process Hyatt and workers embraced as expeditious and fair, and as a result, Hyatt workers in Long Beach now have union representation. We believe CalSTRS' interests as an investor are better served by a similar resolution that removes the risk of boycott and protest activity. We appeal to CalSTRS to engage with PCCP and express your interest in an expedited resolution to the labor dispute at the Hyatt Phoenix. Thank you. So we do have a number of workers that will speak. I will be providing translation. We will try to keep it on time.
Thank you. Please state your name.
Buenas tardes, señor presidente y consejeros. Mi nombre es Margarita Hernández. Yo tengo 12 años trabajando en el Hotel Hyatt Regency Phoenix. Soy mesera de banquetes, donde gano $3.55 por hora. Eso es menos de lo que ganan los demás trabajadores de propina en el hotel.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Trustees. My name is Margarita Hernandez. I have worked at the Hyatt Regency Phoenix for 12 years. I work as a banquet server where I make $3.55 an hour. This is less than what other tipped workers in the hotel earn.
Yo amo mi trabajo. Amo dar buen servicio a los huéspedes y proveerlos con lo mejor de mí. He recibido muchas felicitaciones de los huéspedes, incluyendo cartas que han dejado con mis jefes y también buenas evaluaciones por parte de mis manejadores en el Hyatt. Aún así, tengo miedo de perder mi trabajo.
I love my job. I enjoy interacting with guests, providing them with professional service. Over the years, I have received compliments from guests, including letters they have given to my managers. And Hyatt management has given me good reviews. And yet, I am afraid I will lose my job.
He sido acosada porque soy una inmigrante, intimidada porque me atrevo a soñar. Que podemos mejorar nuestras condiciones de trabajo.
I have been targeted because I'm an immigrant and intimidated because I dare to dream that we could improve our working conditions.
Hace 3 meses, mis jefes empezaron a cortar mis horas y me dijeron que ya no cumplo con los requisitos porque no fluye el inglés. ¿Cómo puede ser posible que Hyatt se acaba de darse cuenta de que mi inglés no es perfecto cuando yo tengo 12 años trabajando para la compañía Hyatt?
3 months ago, my manager started to cut my hours, telling me I don't meet Hyatt's job qualifications because I'm not fluent in English. How is it possible that Hyatt just now realized that my English isn't perfect when I've been working for them for 12 years?
Yo he organizado con mis compañeros de trabajo para llevar nuestras preocupaciones a los jefes del Hyatt, porque yo creo que como inmigrantes nosotros tenemos el derecho a ser tratados con igualdad y con respeto.
I have organized with my coworkers to bring our concerns to Hyatt management because I believe as immigrants we have the right to fair treatment and respect.
Yo apoyo a los derechos de los inmigrantes, tanto en el lugar de trabajo como en la comunidad. Yo estuve en la marcha del 1 de mayo afuera del Hyatt Regency Phoenix. Y también yo di mi testimonio al Concilio de Phoenix cuando ellos aprobaron una resolución a favor de la reforma migratoria en la semana pasada.
I support immigrant rights in the workplace and in our communities. I participated in the May 1st rally outside of the Hyatt Regency and addressed the Phoenix City Council when it passed a resolution for comprehensive immigration reform last week.
Y como resultado a mis acciones, Hyatt me ha vigilado, ha intentado intimidarme. Un supervisor me enseñó una foto de mí en la multitud de la marcha del 1 de mayo. Hay un círculo dibujado apuntando mi cara y dijo, fíjate bien lo que dice, una pancarta la próxima vez que la agarres, porque lo que dice ahí no es cierto.
As a result of my activism, Hyatt has surveilled me and attempted to intimidate me. A supervisor me showed me this picture, which the board has a copy of, the committee. This picture of me at an immigration rally. My face is circled, and my supervisor told me, next time you pick up a picket sign, pay attention to what it says, because what it says here is not true.
Yo puse un cargo con el NLRB alegando interferencia ilegal por parte del Hyatt.
I filed a charge with the National Labor Relations Board alleging illegal interference by Hyatt.
Yo no debo de vivir con esta inseguridad en mi trabajo simplemente porque soy un inmigrante, porque yo deseo un proceso justo de organizar para mí y para mis compañeros de trabajo.
I should not fear for my job because I'm an immigrant and because I want a fair process to form a union for myself and my coworkers.
Como inversionistas, se beneficiarían al tener un acuerdo de paz laboral en el Hyatt Regency Phoenix. Yo pido que le digan al PCCP que traigan un acuerdo así. Gracias. Thank you very much.
As investors, you would benefit from having a labor peace agreement at the Hyatt Regency Phoenix. I ask you to tell PCCP to pursue such an agreement.
Buenas tardes, señor presidente del comité. Mi nombre es Victoria Valencia. Yo he trabajado por el Hyatt Regency Phoenix por 15 años como recamarera. Casi todas las trabajadoras en el departamento son latinas y emigrantes.
My name is Victoria Valencia. I have worked for the Hyatt Regency Phoenix for 15 years as a housekeeper. Almost all of my coworkers in my department are Latinas and immigrants.
El problema más grande que tenemos en el departamento es la carga de trabajo. Hace 6 años, alguien de la corporación vino a cambiar el sistema en que se encuentran los cuartos que limpiamos. El resultado fue de que teníamos que limpiar hasta 30 cuartos al día, el doble de lo que estábamos haciendo y más que doble de lo que hacen las recamareras en los hoteles a nuestro alrededor. Unos meses después de este asunto en el trabajo, mi pierna me empezó a doler tanto que casi no podía caminar.
The biggest problem in my department is workload. About 6 years ago, someone from the corporation came to make a change in the room quota assignments. The result was that we had to clean up to 30 rooms per day, double what we had been doing before and twice as much as the hotels around us are assigned. Shortly after this workload increase, my legs started to hurt me so badly I could hardly walk.
La cantidad de trabajo que nos asignan es bien injusto y muchas de mis compañeras han sido lastimadas como resultado. Pasan accidentes fuertes debidos al correr para terminar los cuartos. Si uno se siente mal, baja a la oficina, nos dan una pastilla y nos mandan de regreso a trabajar. A la hora de la salida, yo tengo compañeras que trabajan que tienen los cuerpos tan acabados que apenas caminan afuera, muchas salen cojeando del hotel.
The amount of work we are assigned is unfair, and too many of my coworkers have been injured as a result. There have been accidents in the rooms that result from rushing. If someone feels bad, she goes down to the office and the manager will give her a pill and send her back to work. I have coworkers whose bodies at the end of the day are so exhausted they can barely walk. Many leave the hotel limping.
Ahora, hay días que estoy tan cansada cuando salgo del hotel que no puedo manejar a casa. Son varias veces que me he encontrado durmiendo tras el volante del carro y he tenido que buscar dónde estacionarme para evitar un accidente grave. Nuestro cargo de trabajo en housekeeping es inhumano.
There are days when I am so tired after I leave the hotel I cannot even drive home. I have caught myself falling asleep at the wheel and have to find a place to pull over in order to avoid having an accident. The workload is inhumane.
Estamos pidiendo que como inversiones en el hotel en que trabajamos, se aseguren que el Hyatt se comprometa a un proceso justo para que podamos decidir si formamos una unión. Muchas gracias.
We are asking you as investors in the hotel to ensure that Hyatt commits to a fair process for us to decide whether to unionize. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Committee. My name is Miriam Mariscal. I am a banquet server. I have worked at Hyatt Regency Phoenix for the past 6 years. I started as an on-call server. After 3 months, I was promoted to full-time. I was excited about it because it meant that I would qualify for benefits. My kids would have health insurance, and I would get paid holidays. The hours that we get in banquets depends on the number of events scheduled in the hotel. In Phoenix, the business slows down in the summer. Only a couple of months after qualifying for full-time work, I got a letter from HR. The letter said that I might lose my benefits because I didn't make my quarterly hours. I went to management. I went to human resources. I asked if I can pick up shifts in another departments. They told me that they would talk to department managers but in the end, nothing happened. I lost my benefits. It made me even more upset when I learned that a white server who got higher in banquets after me was given the opportunity to work in other departments in order for her to keep her benefits. I have lost my health insurance twice. The second time I found out that I needed to have surgery. I had a tumor right next to my spine I was ignoring, but my boys kept on asking me about it and begging me to go to the doctor. It was very stressful. My hours were low, I wasn't making any money, and I didn't know if the tumor was cancerous or not. What was going to happen to my kids, I asked myself. Even though I am a professional server, I have no choice but to apply for Medicaid. That it was humiliating to me. It wasn't my fault that I lost my benefits. I felt disappointed that no one helped, that Hyatt did not help me. I am an immigrant, as most of my coworkers are. We have not been treated with the respect we deserve by Hyatt management. We have endured heavily workloads, low wages, intimidation, and lack of job security. As immigrants, as workers, we deserve better. You are investors in this hotel. We urge you to tell Hyatt to give us a fair process. Hyatt hotels in Long Beach got a fair process. 2 other hotels, same PCCP fund, already have union representation. Why are we being treated differently? Thank you.
Buenas tardes, presidente y miembro del comité. Mi nombre es Jaime Figueroa. Trabajo en el Hyatt Regency de Phoenix por 30 años. Trabajo en el departamento de lavandería. Cuando comencé a trabajar en el Hyatt, había 6 personas haciendo el trabajo. Ahora hacemos 3 de nosotros. Yo era el único latino en la lavandería cuando fui contratado 1 por 1. Los afroamericanos fueron saliendo, fueron despediéndose, pero el Hyatt no los reemplazaba. Como resultado, mi carga de trabajo en la lavandería se hay una eficiencia al lado de la. Sí.
My name is Jaime Figueroa. I've worked at the Hyatt Regency for 30 years. I work in the laundry department. When I started working at the Hyatt, there were 6 people doing the work that 3 of us in the laundry do now. I was the only Latino in the laundry when I was hired. One by one, the African-American guys quit or were fired, but Hyatt didn't replace those positions. As a result, the workload down in the laundry has doubled.
Hay una oficina de la lavandería dentro del hotel. Los manejadores se paran afuera y no miran por la ventana. Siento que estoy como en una prisión con guardias checando qué es lo que hago.
There is an office next to the laundry room in the hotel. The managers stand outside the laundry and look at us through the window. I feel like I'm in a prison cell with the guards watching everything I do.
La semana pasada, Hyatt cerró la lavandería por 3 días en el hotel. Tenía negocio durante ese tiempo y no tuvo sentido para mí que hicieran eso. Les dije a mi manejador antes de irme que esto iba a ser un problema. Cuando regresé el viernes, había montañas de cosas que lavar, algunas que había estado húmedas y se comenzaban a formar manchas negras que son más difíciles de limpiar. Mi manejador no nos mandó ayuda. Tuvimos que lavar todo lo de 3 días en un solo día. Muchas gracias.
So he said last week the Hyatt closed the laundry for 3 days. The hotel was pretty busy during that time, so it didn't make sense to me. When I came back on Friday, there were piles and piles of dirty laundry. Some of it that had been damp and was getting black spots on it that are even harder to clean. My manager did not give us any additional help. We had to do 3 days worth of work in 1 day. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and trustees. My name is Claudia Bautista. I formerly worked at the Hyatt Regency Phoenix as a front desk agent. I landed the job at the Hyatt Regency Phoenix shortly after graduating from UCLA in 2009. At first, the Hyatt Regency seemed like a perfect place to work. I loved the idea of interacting with guests from all over the world, and all over the country and all over the world. My coworkers also came from diverse backgrounds: the Philippines, Vietnam, Eastern Europe. But instead, I got thrown into the job with minimal training. I struggled to do my best. The job requires for you to seem confident and friendly while navigating through a complicated old computer system and taking into consideration knowledge of room locations, packages, rates, amenities, etc. Often, I would have a question. When I would have a question, my supervisor would respond condescendingly. She would say, "Really, Claudia? I thought you went to UCLA." This really hurt my self-esteem. I'm proud that I was able to attend a school like UCLA, but I came from a working class background. My parents and I are immigrants. We never even went on vacations. During all of my school breaks and most weekends of my adolescence, I was in the avocado fields working next to my parents. On several occasions, a supervisor criticized my professionalism and told me things like, "I can't really tell you this. I can't really tell you to change your accent, but you know what I mean." The day I felt most humiliated was when a supervisor told me to repeat the sentence. This is the quote. "I'm going to ask you to call back later." I repeated it, and then she said, "You know that saying axe is ghetto, right?" I asked all my coworkers. Most had accents from Eastern Europe and Asia. None had been asked to repeat the ghetto sentence, except for me and another Mexican-American worker. Why were the Latinas the only ones who were scrutinized about their lack of professionalism as a result of their accents? Even more, I was let go the week before Christmas. Other workers continue to face the kind of mistreatment I endured. I hope you will ask PCCP to make sure Hyatt stops intimidating and abusing workers, and instead gives them the fair process the workers deserve. Thank you.
Okay. On behalf of this committee, I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today and sharing this information with us. I'd like to direct staff to look into this a little bit further and please report back to us at an appropriate time. Thank you very much again. Appreciate it. Okay, are there any questions or comments from committee members? Okay. Next agenda item is item 10, the Chief Investment Officer's Report. Chris?
I always like to report this because many of the teachers in the back of the room write newsletters, and they always want to know where we stand. At May 31, we stood at $165.9 billion. Obviously, the last couple of days have been very difficult in the market, so we're a little bit below that, but we're bouncing right around $165 billion, which, as you can see, is up handily on the fiscal year. And on the other side of the graph is the asset mix. All of the ranges, all of the asset categories are within their allowable range. I will point out again that fixed income is near the bottom, right at the bottom of that range. We have decided during May a couple of times it dropped just a tenth below the range, but we decided not to take any action knowing that you were going to revise the asset allocation. So we'll probably wait again until July before we take any positions. It doesn't make sense to shift the portfolio and then shift it right back a month later. Fiscal year to date, we're starting to get people asking those kinds of questions, and I know there's obviously going to be a very topic of great interest. We are currently running at a very high double-digit rate of return. I shouldn't say high double-digit. We're running at a double-digit return. There are still about 16 trading days left in June, and today was an example of the market can be very choppy, so we're not going to count our chickens before they hatch. The 3-year return, though, is looking very positive because it's important to point out you still have 2010-11, where we had a 21% return that carries over. Even though last year was very flat, we think the 3-year return will also likely land in the double-digit range. So on an absolute basis, we'll have very nice results. Relative basis, it looks like we'll probably just be under the 3-year benchmark, which is still saying a lot because we pointed out that the private equity benchmark back in 2010 was up 45% just in 1 year. So I think we're making our way back, but I still can't say at this point that we're outperforming the benchmark at the total plan level. And there's the 7.5% bogey, sorry to give you a reference point. Returns fiscal year to date are really remarkable. These are as of May 31, so obviously we had a negative start to June this week, but as of last week, you had the U.S. market up over 23%, and what's really remarkable is that you had countries like Germany and even Japan in U.S. dollar terms up even higher, and the resource-rich areas like Canada and Australia, Canada up 10%, Australia though up almost 20%. Contrast the equity returns with the fixed income returns, as we finally would expect. Fixed incomes having very low returns. Interest rates are very much hitting bottom, and in a couple of cases you've seen in the last week where rates have gone back up a little bit. So the U.S. aggregate is really just fixed income traded based on U.S. Securities. The universal includes a little bit more of the international bonds and high yield. So when I look out on terms of what are the risks out there on the horizon, clearly we're going to have another vote this summer on the debt ceiling. The impact of the sequester seems to have certainly lessened. All of the other natural risks still remain. One that I didn't put on there, but I think will probably become talked about, is the fact we hear, and I've sent you emails about the taper, when the Federal Reserve will, I call it unwind, but taper off their purchasing. And Terry pointed out I made an error in the email today. I said that they're buying $85 billion a week. They're buying $85 billion a month of U.S. Treasuries, not per week. But it is $1 billion, which is rather remarkable. So Wall Street is really going to focus in on when are they going to slow that down. What Bernanke said at the last meeting was they wanted the flexibility to slow it down, in essence to ease off the gas pedal, but then if the market was weak, they would put their foot back on the gas pedal. So the street's going to be very focused on that tapering. The other event that will happen is you will have the Jackson Hole Federal Reserve meeting that's at Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Ben Bernanke will not be there due to a prior conflict, and so there will be lots of speculation because his replacement will obviously be making comments, whoever that may be, and people will be judging all of those people because Bernanke's term is up at the end of the year, and most people figure he will not be reappointed. So lots for the Wall Street to worry about in the summertime, which it naturally does. On the positive side, as I call it, and people have called it Helicopter Ben, but you don't fight the Federal Reserve. Certainly we're having a slow growing but a positive growing economy. We've talked about the housing market, and it really is going to get down to what people consider as the beautiful deleveraging, which is a term we've borrowed from Bridgewater and has appeared in publication with a few people, versus an ugly deleveraging. I think Japan's going through that risk in a much faster time period right now with Abenomics and the concern that they are not going to be able to pull off their reforms. And so you saw a very sharp contrast where their market declined very rapidly. Not predicting that here in the U.S., but certainly when we look out into 2014 and more 2015 and 16, it's very uncertain which direction the economy could be going. So a very difficult future. The rest of this year certainly looks like the markets will be in a reasonable trading range and will continue to grow at about a 2-3% GDP rate. Questions?
Any questions or comments? Thank you, Chris. All right, next item 11 is the key decision factors, asset liability modeling. This is no longer an action item. It's going to be an information item at this time, and we'll hopefully take action at the next board meeting in July.
So I'm going to turn it over to Neil and to Bob. They're going to walk you through, and to Alan. And the big thing I want to emphasize is we said this is your opportunity, especially with the three of you. Harry, you can watch on the internet, obviously, is to just really interact with this model and get a comfort for it so that you're ready to go in July with actual decisions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Neil.
Thank you very much, Investment Committee. Harry, good to see you on the other end of the microphone here. Well, what we're going to do is we have a PowerPoint that we're going to go through almost as fast as we can in your book. But we also have a little bit of, to the extent that you desire to see it, we have some interactive capabilities where, as we get into the presentation, we discuss some board investment committee expressed risk concerns. We've quantified those, and what the model does is it reacts to how you emphasize those, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, I'm just going to give a little bit of background, go through this presentation pretty quickly, and feel free, since this is, as Mr. McGuire mentioned, this is turning into more of a workshop setting than an action item. Feel free to ask questions along the way. So we're picking up where we left off. Last time, I believe was last month, we talked about these different risk factors. We're going to talk about those, review those a little bit. We're going to quickly try to get you into what does this all mean in terms of modeling, and what a model is supposed to do is begin to give you a sense of, if you have these concerns, what might an asset allocation look like reflecting those concerns. And just keep in mind, even though we have a lot of, in a sense, unfilled chairs today, the point of the process that we have is to get board members to be talking among themselves about these different risk concerns. And then eventually to express those concerns in form of a consensus risk concern view reflecting the investment committee. So the original goal, this is a little bit modified from before, but we're not going to be trying to select a policy portfolio today, although we can look at many of those options. But we're going to try to acquaint ourselves with the decision process so that when we come back next time, we'll be quite informed on how this model might respond based on your inputs. So just there's a little bit of a brief outline for today. We're going to try to cover the top three areas here in about 20 minutes or so, and then hopefully give people opportunity to take a look at the model. So today, again, the objective is not to select a policy portfolio, but to get an understanding of how the modeling and the decision process works. One of the things that the investment committee asked for was that we develop a model, actually develop two models. One for assuming state support, current state support behavior does not change. Another one is to look at SCR 105, pull scenario one out of SCR 105, and model that as probably a very optimistic scenario in terms of state support. So we have models reflecting both of those. And we've been sort of working overtime to not only create one model, but two, and to take into account these different risk factor notions. So there, just as a little bit of a caveat, there are a couple of typos along the way that have nothing to do with the substance of the presentation. I'll highlight those. So I'll skip this slide and we'll move to what I have is slide 6. I don't know what INV number that is. It's like INV 118. So last time, this is the set of decision factors or set of risk factors that the board discussed and in a sense settled on. Subject to some of the discussion at the last meeting, we modified a little bit of the wording in these to better reflect the intentions of the investment committee. Probably one of the key words in the top one is the word relative. Just want to make, and that is reflected in how we measure this particular factor. There is a typo on this page, and that is under the second one, we actually seek to maximize the 20-year geometric return, not the real return, but the total nominal return. So that's what's, and that really doesn't have any material impact on the process at all, but we seek to maximize the total geometric return, again, in the model, not a real return. Now, we've got these color-coded. What does that mean? That basically means that if you emphasize those two decision factors at the top that are color-coded green, you're probably going to end up with a portfolio that is risk-taking and seeks a higher return. The red implies that you're protection-oriented. You're probably going to end up with a portfolio that has lower volatility and would be construed as safer when you looked at the asset allocation. Not necessarily the case all the time, but that's sort of the tendency when you weight those. Another point on this is that we, every single portfolio, when we went through this, was analyzed across 1,000 different, in a sense, randomly generated market scenarios that move around the forward-looking capital market assumptions that you approved last time. So there's 1,000 different possible market scenarios. Every single portfolio within your constraints, which another slide will say there's over 50,000 possible portfolios, was ranked on its ability to perform under each of those risk categories. Some were the portfolios, some were good, some were not so hot, and we'll talk about that when we get into the modeling.
Just to put a little meat on that, what that means is that if you look at the path, the funding path, a portfolio does well if it's consistently producing funded ratios above that. And what we do then is we rank all the portfolios in their ability to generate better results. Thank you. I'm sorry. Better results over time than its brethren, if you will. And the relatively best ranked ones get scored higher, and the worst ranked ones get scored lower. So that's just what we're trying to do is take these sort of better, worse things and make them quantifiable and measurable.
All right, this next slide is just sort of a little bit of an editorial slide. We have what's called a simulation-based model. Some people like to use the more elegant, traditional mean variance-based models. This is a comment from, on the bottom of this slide, from the founder and the creator of the elegant, traditional-based models, that if he could, he would prefer to use a simulation-based model. So, yes, sir.
I have a question. I'm sorry, I apologize. Can you go back one slide? Please. The 6, that one, yes.
Yeah.
This was probably a decision that we probably discussed it at an earlier board meeting, but just to refresh, could you please, on the second item, define geometric return? What geometric as opposed to compound or some other type of return? And also, why did we choose 20-year there as opposed to 30-year?
First. Yeah, I think the horizon was generally picked because that's in a way, kind of the most important time for this fund under the current statutory funding system, because it's when you have assets. I beg your pardon, I think I must be blocking it, I apologize. The 20 years, I think, was based on, I don't recall exactly the factors, but I think it was based on the estimated time that the fund stays with positive assets going forward, based on the current assumptions. Short periods short periods tend not to reflect structural issues, like the fact that you're not getting enough money. Longer periods tend to allow a lot of sort of averaging out of highs and lows. So 20 years was picked. Geometric mean is the same thing as compound return. So it's sort of risk adjusted in the sense that the variability lowers the number.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a second. That screen disappeared, just a second.
They're really asking you to multitask on those screens.
Someone's gonna have
aren't
to
you?
come up and find the screen that has, because it's no longer, maybe this is it.
I just had a question on the third factor, also on the time frame, beyond 10 years, what about down beyond 10 years? What's the significance of 10 years?
There's almost no portfolio that generates PAYGO within 10 years.
He was on the third one, not the fourth.
Well, he mentioned the fourth one as well, I think.
Okay.
And I don't recall what the issue was on the third one.
Well, the third one is sort of interesting because what we're looking at there, it says avoid significant asset drawdowns within the next 10 years. So what did we do in terms of defining a significant asset drawdown? That was, we looked over a 2-year period. So over the next 10 years, we're looking at rolling 2-year periods. So there's, I think if you calculate it out within what is that? There's 9 2-year periods within a particular total 10-year time frame when you roll them. And we're looking at the worst 2-year period that might occur within that, and we're counting them up. So the issue there is short-term drawdown risk. So we're not really, do we really care about a bear market that occurs, 30 years from now? It's really the bear market that's going to, the potential for a bear market in the next 10 years. If we get one of those, depending on the extent of it, it could threaten the business model of not only this system, but many other defined benefit systems like it. And that's what we're trying to get to, is a short-term risk concern.
All right, Paul? Or no longer?
Okay, and then just the only other comment on slide 7 here is okay, if we're doing simulation, what's the difference between a simulation and an elegant model? And it goes to the point that you're raising about the short-term risk concern, is that simulation models tend to pick up what's called negative skewness or significant drawdown activity that an elegant model does not, particularly in the short term. And that's just a better reflection of reality and what we all face when we come across one of these bear markets, which have occurred more often over the last 12 years than they have in prior periods. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have, Bob is going to begin to introduce the simulation model. And there's a bunch of assumptions associated with the model we just want to highlight, let you know about those. And then Bob's going to show you some of the plan projections just to get you thinking about, I guess in a sense, the ongoing flows of the system, potential flows of the system, as well as the balance sheet for the system in terms of funding ratios and other things. So I'll turn it over to Bob here, and we'll just highlight some of the assumptions that are in the model.
Well, first of all, we started with Milliman's projection of your future benefit payments and liability growth. Now, we've assumed that your actuarial assumptions will remain steady and constant no matter what the market does. So that's kind of, otherwise you end up with too many moving parts in a model like this. Then what we do is, using a database of returns that are in accord with your capital market assumptions, we randomly select random years of returns for each asset class, and then we simulate the behavior of the fund going forward. And so there's a bit of a feedback loop there. In the case of the model that is SC 105, is that the number? I think I'm losing.
SCR 105.
SCR 105. The assets that you have, the returns you have, affect the actuarial contribution. In the case of the statutory funding scheme, that feedback loop isn't there. So what we do then is, starting from now, using the projected benefits and liabilities that we receive from Milliman, we then start simulating asset returns, simulating asset levels with actuarial smoothing that you have built in, and computing a cost every year going forward. In the case of the statutory scheme, that cost is more or less level until such time as you run out of assets, when it pops up to the pay-go, or the benefit level being paid. In other words, we assume that somebody is going to, the state, if you will, perhaps, will pick up those benefits even in the absence of assets from this plan. Let's see, where was I? You have to pardon me a little bit, because I'm running on very little sleep. Two scenarios, as Neil mentioned: the actuarial funding scenario, assuming that SCR 105 gets through, and we'll show you what the cost looks like on that, and the statutory assumption. Oh, and the other thing I was going to mention is that these projections do take into account both the emerging baby boom and the growth in benefits that you're going to experience from that, and the passage of PEPRA and the reduction in benefits long-term that you'll experience from that. And that's, of course, the California Public Employees Pension Reform Act. If you look at the next slide, which is my slide 10, and
INV 122.
You'll see the projection that's included in from the Milliman results of the benefit payments over the next 70 years. This tends not to be the way we look at things, because it's in dollars, and what you see no matter what happens is a ski slope, and the high numbers at the end tend to obscure variations in the middle. So typically we detrend these by looking at benefits as a percentage of payroll. That's the next slide. And in the benefits as a percentage of payroll, you see two salient features of this plan. Number one, you see the emerging baby boom payouts over the next 30 years or so that pull benefits up over 50% as a percentage of payroll. And then you start seeing the tapering down as the baby boom moves along, and also as PEPRA comes into place. Our experience with PEPRA across many plans is that typically that has represented a 15% decrease in benefit levels, around 15%. And when you look at your pure normal cost, that's about what you see. This is one of my infamous spaghetti charts. And what this shows is all of the simulated possibilities for your current policy allocation over the next 70 years. And on the horizontal axis, you see years, 2012 to 2082. Vertical axis, you see billions of dollars of assets in place. And every one of the kind of tannish lines is a possible trial based on a simulated set of asset returns for the portfolio, and the heavy blue line in between is the average. And this is under the current policy, the current statutory funding scheme. You can see that under the current statutory scheme, there is indeed a possibility that the assets will grow and will not become, the fund will not become insolvent. But there's a lot of crashing into the zero grid that happens over the next 30 years or so, or 40, starting in 10 years and going out to 30. And the average ends up being insolvent at around 30 years, which agrees very much with the Milliman model. Go ahead. Yeah. If you look at the funded ratio, which is, of course, the ratio of your assets to liabilities, you can see kind of a similar sort of thing. Number one, you can see that your funded ratio is almost guaranteed to go down to zero over time. There are some few trials where the returns are so spectacularly great that it doesn't happen. It's not impossible, but it's not something I would plan on.
And it's the current.
Okay.
So now we got a new scenario.
Okay, where are we now? Oh, okay, now if, I want to skip ahead a slide and come back.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm going to go to my slide 15, which is on the next page.
IMV 127.
What we're assuming with this slide, what we're looking at here is the actual contributions that would be required under SCR 105.
Scenario 1.
It's scenario 1, yes. And we're assuming that the actuarial cost will be graded into at a rate no more than 3% per year. So you can see that, again, in 2012, we started the statutory rate. We stay there for a while, and then starting in 2014, which is when SCR 105 option 1, scenario 1, starts raising rates, the rate increases by 3% per year until the actual actuarial cost is reached, and then it becomes the actuarial cost. Now, what happens there is under good trials where you have good returns, and you've got good returns on your assets, you build up assets, and the actuarial cost is maybe something like 30% of pay, at which point you diverge from the upward slope and cruise along somewhere at 30% of pay as one of your tan lines. On the other hand, if you have a series of really crummy returns, it takes a long time for that 3% increase per year to catch up with the actuarial cost. And you can see, in fact, it can be out to 20 years before you finally catch up with the actuarial cost on your 3% annual increases. So you have a lot of paths to actuarial cost, and you can also see that some of those costs are rather staggeringly high. The vertical axis is cost as a percentage of pay. And you can see that there are some trials that get you up to 80% of pay in planned cost. And that is indeed the amount of volatility you're looking at with an investment of risky assets. If you have really bad future returns, every dollar that you don't earn in the market has to be contributed by the employers or the state. Now, the funded chart that goes with that is on the prior slide, on my slide 14, and you're what, 121?
126.
126. Yeah. Never was very good with numbers. And you can see here the funded ratio. 3% contribution under the SCR 105 scenario 1 contribution rate. Now you can see that on average, your funding increases from its current level around 60% to 100% over a fairly long period of time. However, you can see that with some crummy return scenarios, your funded ratio drops. You'll notice that the funded ratio never ever gets to zero here. And that's because when you get down to really low asset levels, the actuarial cost becomes so high, and we assume that the actuarial cost is what is actually contributed here, that the actuarial cost itself is enough to overtake any conceivable asset loss on the remaining rump assets. So you're almost forced to an increase. You are forced to an increasing funded ratio. But generally speaking, there's a floor of around 10 to 20% on the assets.
Now, do you want to comment anything on the distinction between these two slides? I mean, the interesting thing, just flipping back between the funded ratios between the two contribution scenarios, is that the funding ratio path isn't really decipherably different for about the first, 5 to 9 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a fair statement, although you're continuing to make some pretty stiff contributions. The first, I think, until 2014, you're still staying on the statutory funding. So there's a couple year lag there anyway. And then it takes time for the assets to accumulate. So under the go to the statutory funding, back,
This one?
yeah, that one. Under statutory funding, you're virtually guaranteed to become insolvent. And then go to the next. Under actuarial funding, you're virtually guaranteed not to become insolvent. But the price you pay for that is the risk of, next slide, very high potential employee, or plan cost, employer and state contributions.
So that just sort of provides some background. Those scenarios are what you just saw. Those projections are in the model. What we presented in those series of slides related just to the current asset allocation structure that you have now. When you place an emphasis on those different decision factors, those paths can potentially change. And we're going to walk through the modeling process a little bit. And to begin that process, we have to ask ourselves, what portfolios do we want to look at? And so in dialogue with Chris and a couple of other staffers, the first of all is to say, what is the range of portfolios that we might want to consider? That is reflected in a set of constraints in terms of minimums you might allocate to one asset class versus a maximum for that asset class. They're laid out here on this table on page 16. There's some interesting things here. You can see that the maximums on real estate and private equity are pretty much where their actuals are at now. So based on staff's ability to implement and views on where to take those classes going forward, given their current risk and return profiles, there's really not an openness to ramp them up considerably from this point. The other thing that's on this slide is at least in terms of the possibilities, is on the two lower classes, absolute return overlay and inflation sensitive. We've put those at a pretty high level versus their actual allocations and their current policy today, indicating that there is, based on the risk tolerance of the investment committee, there is plenty of room to allocate a lot more assets to these particular two classes than you have had in the past.
Mr. Rosenstiel has a question.
Thank you. Yeah, just before we go into this, just sort of back on what we just discussed. I was one of the people who wanted us to look at two different approaches, both the current statutory contributions as well as what would happen if the option one under SCR 105 were adopted. And it wasn't my expectation in asking for that, and I see that there's a different interpretation of how to approach it. It wasn't my expectation that we would then be making contribution rates a variable in the simulations. Under the current statute, contribution rates are set. And I kind of thought that when we looked at an alternative of the legislature taking action, that we would have a higher level of contributions, but those contribution rates would be set so that our outcomes in terms of funding would be isolated as a function of asset allocation and investment performance, as opposed to varying the funding levels as we varied asset allocation. I can see how that, is open to interpretation, but I think when we ultimately look at the results of this model, it's going to be a little difficult for us to isolate what the impact of asset allocation decisions is going to be if the asset allocation decisions also affect the funding levels. And my concern about wanting to look at the two was in particular to make sure that we did look at what happened if we didn't get contribution increases, because I think that's where our risk is. Our risk You know, as you said, Bob, if we increase contributions, we almost never run into the risk of running out of money. If we don't increase contributions, we almost never run the risk of not running out of money in 30 years. But my big question is, what's the risk and how do we mitigate the risk if we don't get contribution increases of running out of money before 30 years? And how soon is that? Is that 25 years or 20 years or 15 years? Because we can't, if we can't as a board do anything to correct the downward slide since we can't affect contributions. So just, you know, I think it's going to be difficult for me to draw conclusions, at least in terms of the way I'm thinking about the decision making, if we're changing contribution levels as we're changing asset allocation.
Yeah, the one